end of the PTA meeting at Ruth's Acti, and the list of questions came up, and I was like, it's a long list. It was not so much long as it was dense, but Jill and I did try to go through all of the questions and think we have a response. We'll figure out if it's to your satisfaction or not, to some, but we have a response for all of them, and I do know that a couple of them you got responses from Lisa. So forgive us now if we are duplicating what you heard. But the first one, and I know that I think it was put in the chat, all the questions. So I'm thinking everyone has the questions. Okay. The first one was the big one. It was like, yeah, there's a lot of talk. I'm paraphrasing, by the way, I'm putting this in Nikia words. There's a lot of talk here in Berkeley. There's a lot of, good intentions and plans. But really the question is like, what are the concrete tasks being set into motion to really implement the systems where children get a more even and still excellent experience here in Berkeley? So that was a big question. And I think that where Jill and I first went was to the focus that was called out last year, which was on organizational clarity, the focus that we're actually keeping this year. And actually the person who drafted this question actually named organizational clarity as a keystone of the stated plans. But one of the things about organizational clarity is that we called out 4 areas, if you will, of organizational clarity. And those were identity, infrastructure, identified focal populations, and implementation. And the reason why I go back to that is because when you're asking for the concrete task being set out to really increase equity and access, my words again, not yours, but really making sure that our babies have more even and excellent experience in the district, implementation is the piece that we're really focusing on. So we know we have a lot of plans here in Berkeley, but what we found in listening and learning, and now after being here for a year, is that there's not necessarily structures and mechanisms to make sure those plans actually are implemented. So first and foremost, we spent a good chunk of last year really understanding our various plans and making sure that the folks who need to implement those plans, even though they're all BUSD plans, really understand them. And so when you think about things like our CSACE plan, our literacy action plan, or some of the various initiatives that we have in the district, the African American Success Framework, all those things existed pre-us and pre-last year, but it wasn't necessarily a part of the flow, or it wasn't, I don't know how to say it, it wasn't a part of the organization. And so we spent a lot of time last year really understanding, even our LCAP, quite honestly, really understanding them and what they're saying that we're going to do, and then thinking about how do we make sure that everyone knows it and then is clear about what their role is to implement that. So our concrete step, and though it doesn't probably seem super concrete, one of them was to make sure that everybody knew the plans and their roles in the plans and what the plans were saying we were going to do and how the plan was going to measure it. The other thing that we have been doing that's a concrete plan that also might not seem concrete is really collecting data around the implementation of those plans, or the operationalization, is that a word, of those plans. So what I mean by that is really spending time. Now people have a sense of the plans, right? Whatever the plan is, then spending time to really make sure we have structures to develop folks' capacity and ability to actually implement them. So the PD structure that we started last year, we're continuing this year with our educators and including more educators. There are structures for our folks on the Ed Services team to really get together themselves and start to really learn. I'm on Literacy Action Plan, sorry I didn't say that, and really learn and understand how literacy develops and what are the various foundational aspects of reading, but what's the comprehensive literacy instruction or period look like. We're also doing that same work with our principals. So now implementation means that we're not just learning the plans and understanding them, we're actually doing things to make sure we have the capacity to do them. We also are collecting tons of data that's not just around implementation, not just around the impact of these plans. So not just looking at scores, or not just looking at if suspension is going up or down, or not just looking at if our folks of color feel more welcome, but really the implementation data. So how many people came to the PD, or how many families came to this particular convening, and can folks report out or say what it is they're supposed to be doing and why. We just had an African American Success Advisory Committee where we spent a nice chunk of time really talking about the purpose of that committee and everyone's roles in that committee. So just a lot of us spending time to make sure that the implementation piece actually happens is where we are now. And again, can be easily taken for granted, but it is a part in a lot of organizations where it's not the focus. Folks go straight to, here's the plan, here's the impact of those plans, and then are upset because the things are not having the impact you wanted them to have, but it's often because you didn't spend time really building awareness and understanding and actually making sure you can monitor and track the implementation and having some clear implementation metrics. So that's the nutshell. If you give me a specific plan, I could kind of give you a specific, like, this is what we're doing in service of that plan. But that's kind of the general ways in which we're going back by making sure that, implementation actually happens. And we believe, right, the folks who, whether the plans that we made or not, we believe that if these plans are actualized, the experience and the outcomes of our students will improve. We also have some preliminary data. So looking at our our internal data last year, we saw, when looking at DIBELS, that there was progress, for example, for many of our babies where their teachers were participating in that PD. We see teachers implementing more of the things that we're talking about in their math discussion. So we definitely have some evidence from last year that things are moving us in the direction we want to move into. We have more participation in our PDs, for example. We have more folks administer various assessments. And we think if we stay the course, if you will, and engage in continuous improvement, so stopping periodically to look at the data, be it implementation or impact data, to ask those questions, are we all on the same page? Do we know what we're doing? Is anyone a change? We think we will have even better results, not just academic results, but better results, meaning actually moving towards the goals or the intentions of those various plans that we're implementing. So I'm open to answering more questions about that, or if you have a plan in particular, but that's the nutshell answer to a very big, humongous question.
I do have a follow-up. What might be an example of something that you're particularly proud of, where you've been able to do the things that you just mentioned?
It could be because, literacy is one of my loves, but I would say that literacy, the work that we've done around literacy, is one of the ones that I'm really proud of. And that's only because that's work that we've kind of gotten, perhaps one of the areas of work that we've kind of gotten the furthest around. And when I say that, what I mean is, well, literacy and data informed culture. Let me say both of those kind of together. And what I mean by that is when I first got here, folks were like, oh, Berkeley doesn't like assessments and Berkeley doesn't, right? And came in like ready for a lot of resistance around, assessing our students to understand where they are and what they need instructionally. And last year we were able to not launch DIBELS because it wasn't new, but really increase the number of folks who are actually administering the assessment. Still got work to do, but just the participation and administration itself like improved, right? So we have now data that we can use to inform conversations that our educators are having. We also then engaged in common PD time, which also was new. Typically on Wednesdays, every site was able to do what that site needed to do, which is great. We love autonomy, but sites were doing different things. And so there really weren't structures. It wasn't a structure for our educators to consistently come together and talk about a topic, in this case, literacy, and use the same language, et cetera. So last year we launched a book study. And that book study really focused primarily, or really kind of had a slant, if you will, towards the earlier literacy grades, so K1, 2, but still it was the start of structures where our educators were able to come together, read, pick a strategy to implement, and then get coaching and support around that. This year, because we were able to start that last year, this year, not only are we still having that Wednesday structure, but now we have all of our educators, K8, coming together, now getting more PD and coaching on reading, and specifically the core foundations of reading with the organization called CORE, by the way, where they again can share best practices, get ideas, et cetera, but they're all coming together across grade levels, across sites to learn the same thing. So we're moving towards having a more common and consistent understanding, if you will, of just the key components of literacy instruction taught by folks who know what they're talking about. Not that we didn't, and we don't, because we do, but sometimes you need some folks who are outside to come in and share what they know, what research has shown, et cetera, and have some different and fresh ideas of ways to look at things. So I would say that those are just two small examples for literacy work. But I'm excited because there's definitely questions, right? Why are we doing this? And what are we doing? But I would say the resistance isn't what I expected it to be. And where there has been resistance, there's also been an overwhelming amount of support to recognize we need to do something different for our students. So that's an example. Jill, I don't know if you want to tag on. I've been talking for a minute. I think one more thing with that is we now have a curriculum instruction department. I think that, for me, it was bananas crazy to come into a school district and not have a department that was really focused on instruction and curriculum, right? And so now there's a place where that kind of all comes together, which I know will also help with that coherence and alignment piece. We have more training that's together for our coaches, right? So again, just really thinking about this idea of coherence, not just around literacy, that's just the example, but it's happening in different places. And now we have a person who focuses on early literacy. So again, support the professional development and the work that's happening. So literacy is my exciting one right now, but there's other examples of us trying to do similar things across other plans or other initiatives in the district. I'm gonna be quiet and let Jill say something before Lindsay jumps in. Jill?
Literacy was definitely the key focus area coming in. But I think underneath that, I do think in this context, first of all, good evening, everybody. Thanks for the invite. Good to see you all. I think in the context of organizational clarity, one of the other slides that we've shown a lot is this notion of the iceberg. So there's a lot that's happening under the surface of the water in order to build an infrastructure that gets to the tip of the iceberg that everybody else sees. And I don't want to understate that part of the challenge and opportunity that at least I came into in my new role was a team of folks who were still relatively new. Most of the directors in the Ed Services department were hired at some point during COVID. And so there were a lot of missing infrastructure pieces that would bring teams together, that would align folks around a common set of goals, and just understanding the breadth of initiatives and resolutions that the district has supported over time. All of that work across the Literacy Action Plan and the LCAP and the Multilingual Learner Master Plan and the African American Success Framework and the Latinx Resolution and the CSACE Plan lands squarely on the same set of people in the Ed Services department. And so we've really been trying to do the work of driving toward alignment across a set of plans that existed before any of us got here. And so we have been doing a lot of that work. It's still very messy, so I just want to acknowledge that. But I do think, at least, just from the words of our outside consultant, there's been a lot of movement from what she called, Dr. Kim Gibbons is working with us on the Literacy Action Plan, and she really identified this whole, she has seen us move from silos to systems. And so there's just a lot of intersections that have to happen in order to make these initiatives real and true for our students. I have seen and witnessed a deep commitment on part of the team to make that happen, but there's also an acknowledgement of very overloaded plates. So I just want to say that one of the things that we have really done is just try to clear out the field and identify some key organizational structures that we need to have in place, and then how we can work to build a muscle around identifying these intersections across the various initiatives. So that I would add that.
And just what Jill was talking about in terms of the silos, I would just add that the silos definitely existed at the central office, right? And there's a lot of work that's being happened to de-silo those silos. But I would also say, just really transparently, that there were definitely silos at the school sites. And what I mean by that is, like, Cragmont was Cragmont and Ruth Ackley was Ruth Ackley, and right, and great stuff happening at all of them, but great stuff happening oftentimes at all of them, like, on their own, right? And so one of the things that I would say about some of the progress and things that we're excited about is that there's a lot more collaboration. Like, principals talk all the time, don't get me wrong, but a lot more thoughtful and intentional collaboration between our site leaders in ways that are structured and, like, intentional, versus like, well, it's up to you if you want to call that principal. And there's a lot more targeting of that, but also what's that called, vertical alignment as well. So not to look hierarchical, but like there's a lot more collaboration between site leaders, right? And like I said, TSAs and folks who are coaches at the site and the folks at the central offices who are making decisions or informing things. And I think that de-siloing is important too. It's not just the horizontal, but it's also the vertical. So that's something that I'm really excited about. And now folks are sharing and feeling okay to be like, I don't know how to do this. I just was actually at Rosa Parks and at another school, and they're like, Nikki, that's my other name, Nikki, look at this. And they were showing me something. And I was like, wait a minute, you got that? They're like, yeah, we got that from Ruth Ackley, right? And so there's now like excited sharing of ideas and structures and best practices, even if they're not willing to try things, right? And there's also like, again, this vulnerability of like, I don't know how to do this, or looks like you're getting more results. Like, can you show me what to do? So I think that's another nod to that de-siloing and that coherence work that Jill was just referencing. Lindsay?
So I think that all of us here, you know, as we work with PTAs and community work, the work is hard. And so we have a lot of empathy for the systems and structures and the de-siloing work, because it is very relevant to what we do here. And as you know, I truly believe that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So that's all good. I'm wondering if you're taking your learnings from like these highlights that you're sharing about the literacy work and the implementation and building those structures, and planning to build those structures out even further so that they can be replicated for the other areas of attention that we're going to need to focus on next. And some of it is like hidden like structures, like the fact that we have these great new DIBELS assessments, but we're still doing benchmark reading level assessments, you know, which is 20 minutes per kid.
Yep.
You know, like those simple learnings that we don't have to learn them over and over again. We can take that learning and put it toward another subject. And also to do a part two, if we're working on increasing transparency for family members and community, because as we know, the literacy action plan includes family engagement and awareness. So are we learning our lessons there and increasing transparency? Many school districts have a list of the curriculums they use for tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 clearly on their website. Our link to that is broken. It's a 404.
Okay.
So
that was a multi-pronged. That was
sorry,
not.
You have multi-pronged answers. It was confusing.
I know. I'm used to you. Okay. So I would say the first one that you asked was just like, are we, you know, how are we, and are we actually kind of learning from what we're learning and doing specifically around literacy, for example, and thinking about how does that then apply to other areas of either improvement or other content areas? And I would say the answer is yes, much to many members of the team's chagrin. Like when I talked about that implementation data of us like really collecting that data, it is a lot of us documenting what we're doing and not doing, right? And so documenting our processes, documenting what kind of questions we ask, right? There's a lot of that. And that is actually a very integral part of the continuous improvement cycle. I know some folks are like PDSA, and there's a lot of similarities, but we definitely, Jill and I both have been really trained by folks who the science of continuous improvement and how you make a small change and how you identify why you're making that change, how you know it's going to, you know, why you think it's going to lead to success, or why did you even decide that one, what is success going to look like, but also really documenting those small moves to learn from them and then figure out, do we adapt, adopt, or abandon, right? So we did it for years. So we come with that lens. It is a lot, and it is easy to like go and start moving and then forget to stop and reflect. And so a part of those structures is for our executive cabinet, even for our principal meetings, there's like stop and reflect time. Like we you know, our principals, for example, just had a training with the core facilitators. So they get it, and then the teachers get it. That's an opportunity for us to stop and reflect. It's like, oh, how about we tweak this? Or last time we did this training, this is what we found out. So how do we do it better or differently this next time? So we're definitely documenting a lot and trying to learn a lot, such that it can be applied in other places. I would say at the same time, we're also doing it in other places. It might be in different stages, right? But we're not like waiting for one thing to be complete before we start other things. So we're taking that learning in real time and trying to apply it. with that said, of course, one of the learnings is communication is always hard, right? And so how are you without stopping doing the work? Because we got to get the work done. And like Jill said, there's only like 10 people doing all the work. Like, how do you both balance the doing of the work and the learning from the work and the sharing out of the work, right? In ways that feel authentic and responsive. And so we continue to grapple with that. But at my board meeting comments, 2 board meetings ago, I said that was our focus. Last board meeting, actually. Communication is one of the things that we're trying to do differently and better. And not just around literacy, just in general. How do we get information out to families? So we know we have the website. Everybody doesn't use the website. So doing little video clips, because sometimes like, you know what, I'm auditory, I just want to see a little clip, give me the dates or whatever. So trying different things in that way. With regard to literacy, for example, we have the literacy website, building that out, but we know that's not enough. So one of the questions, the next question is, what's the plan to communicate plans to the community? So I'll hit that in more detail with the next question. But I would say to you that in all transparency, what we really want to do, and we definitely know that it's important to keep you all engaged and make sure families know what's going on. And we got our road show. We're coming to different groups like this and answering questions and sharing. And we want to first make sure that our staff knows it and understands it, right? I don't want to come and do, answer questions for you and tell you what the teachers are doing, and teachers don't even know they're doing it yet. So we really have been really prioritizing, if that makes any sense to you all in terms of change management, really prioritizing, making sure the folks themselves who are doing the work know that they're doing the work and know why they're doing the work and what the work is. And we will definitely keep you all apprised and, move you along with us, but just being really honest that the first kind of change management move that we needed to make in this regard, as we kind of did the reflection on our communication, was first make sure we communicate to the educators and staff themselves, and then think about what's the communication plan to our families.
I just wanted to underscore that point, is just recognizing that we have a lot of our teachers and leaders are leaning into new learning. And sometimes it's hard to be a learner and then be the face of that work at the same time. And so we do, we're really mindful of focus on the internal communication with staff so that we can have a uniform message, and then particularly understanding where we have opportunities to build capacity and that shared learning, and then staging out the more public facing communication. So it's always a tricky balance, but communication is a component of all of this work that we do. And as Nikki said, when we get to question number 2 for the list today, we've got some thoughts about, how that gets shared out more broadly with the community.
So with that, wanted to share with you all that the next question was specifically around literacy and communication for literacy. And it says, literacy is a key focus of academic improvement this year, which it is. What is the plan for messaging to staff and the plans for the wider community about the plans? So the first thing I wanted to say and show is that we do have a website that is specifically focused on our literacy efforts. And that website is here in front of you. It is very much still in its infancy, if you will. And so at this point, what it really does is kind of does an overview of the literacy action plan. It shares the goals of the literacy action plan. And then at the end, it has various reports that are shared out to the board, as well as different reading lists. And I just wanted to show you this just for your reference so you can know it's there and so you can copy the URL. But you see that it has this hashtag of Berkeley Reads, because whoever crafted this question was right on. That is a really important focus for us this year. It was a focus last year and it continues to be a focus. And so the website is one strategy that we have to make sure that our families and our community knows about our efforts around reading. But some of the other things, again, speaking to how we're really trying to think about different ways to communicate. One of the ways that we're making sure that our community knows is that in addition to the website, we're having presentations to the board or updates to the board periodically. So we actually just had one at the last board meeting that was all about literacy, ethnic studies, science, social studies, and reading, and went over what our plans are for those areas of work and the professional development that's happening for our educators. Science talked about the work they're doing with FOSS and showed some samples. So we're trying to kind of sprinkle in throughout our board meetings updates that are both for the board and for the community about the work that we're doing around different forms of literacy, but we'll start to be more specific just about English language arts, that literacy as well. We also have really been doing, or we're starting to do, the roadshow. You're probably the second group, meaning that when we are going to various advisory committees or events or speaking to different affinity groups, et cetera, we are sharing and talking about our focus on literacy and how we are focusing on literacy, talking about professional development. We're actually drafting something that's for the website that will help families understand when our teachers are in these PDs with CORE, like who is CORE, what is CORE, and what are they teaching our educators. And so we're also building some resources for families that they could just go to the website, click, and get it, as well as, of course, resources that they could we can make copies and have them at the school sites. So really thinking about how do we not overwhelm folks, but definitely sprinkle in and let people know that this is the focus and give you some updates on how we are moving in that direction. We, of course, also do professional development, I just mentioned, with our educators, our principals first, because the idea is that when you're at these PTA meetings or when you're at the school site councils or DLACs or whatever meetings are appropriate for your site, you also are hearing from your school leaders what the foci is, right? And that foci is literacy and how that's being operationalized at the school site. We don't want it to be that you just have to come to a board meeting or hear from me or Jill. Our literacy focus and what we're doing around literacy, because what we're doing around literacy is happening at the sites in the classrooms. So us making sure that our principals feel efficacious and able to speak to it is another way that we're trying to get the information out to the community. And again, like I said, creating tools and resources for our families, for our staff, just being a lot more explicit. So again, last year was the first year. We had our early release Wednesdays that we took advantage of. They were our union labor partners and us, had conversations that allowed us to do one meeting a month, and we continue those great collaborative conversations. But really being really clear with our educators, this is what we're doing and this is why. Here's the research, here's what's next, here's the direction, and we're expecting to see things happening in the classroom. So our principals are going around classrooms, making observations, giving feedback. They just actually got a little quick training on how to do another way to do an informal observation. So really making sure that we're really clear with our educators about what we're doing during those PD times is another way to get it out. Rose James, who is I'm going to say her title wrong, Coordinator of Literacy, PK-12, which again is another new position that's supporting literacy work. She did an excellent video for our educators that was framing the work that's ahead for us in literacy, what we're focusing on and why we're focusing on it and how we're going to focus on it. I do videos periodically to the staff just to say, hey, this is part of organizational clarity, focusing on literacy. Here's why, and reminding them again of the steps and what's to come. So again, we're trying different ways to make sure that folks understand the work, but they understand the why of the work and give periodic updates of where we are in that work along the way. So I don't know if that answered the question, Tasang, but that was our nutshell. That was our nutshell answer.
Fantastic. Are you gonna turn it into a pumpkin soon? Because supposedly we have you for half an hour.
Say it again. No, we're okay.
Right.
It's only like 2 or 3 more questions. We're good.
Okay.
Also,
Why don't we go? Do you want to talk a little bit about extended learning? Any sort of your vision about how that might be, or what your thoughts and feelings about it? I know that we all know that we have a sort of a collaborative with Lisa and her group, but just hearing from you, what are your thoughts and feelings about
say more to something that was not on my paper.
Well, we did have a question about extended learning. So
you had questions about staffing for example.
Yeah, it was very specific. I mean, we did get some answers from like Lisa, but just sort of it's I guess to put it not so delicately, it's been a problem that we've been dealing for many years. And I'm just wondering how it ranks for you in terms of, I don't know. It's not a really easy question for me to frame for you. I mean, what are you going to say? Oh, I don't think it's that important. I mean,
right.
I think everyone thinks that it's really important and that it's a pain point for a lot of parents. We personally are dealing with it for the first time. We've always had been in learns for the last 6 years, and suddenly we were just scrambling at the last minute. Just I don't know, just that I think that's all I can say right now. It's just sort of, what are your thoughts about, where we're going, and, what do you think an ideal situation would be, or
Yep. So that's I think there's something really specific in your head that hasn't gotten out yet. So I'm gonna wait for it to come out. But I would say in general, I definitely, I mean, of course, yeah, I'm not gonna say I don't think extended learning is valuable, but I actually honestly don't. I actually do think that it's actually very valuable. And the reason why is because what we know is that extended learning offers an opportunity to extend learning for our babies, right? And so what we did last year was really start working with our Bears and Learns teams so that the folks who are in those programs or who are leading those programs have some level of understanding of ways they can support the babies with their homework, for example, or if they're struggling in math. And so in a very literal sense, I do think that it is crazy for us to think that we're going to close these achievement and access gaps in the hours that we have in school. I think that we're going to do a lot in the hours that we have in school, and it never hurts to have that extra dosage of extended learning, quite literally. I also think, though, that extended learning is an opportunity to expose our students to learning that they otherwise would not have for many students, right? Because the school day is impacted. Berkeley is very unique, and I've said this to you all, I think, several times. Like, I think that folks in Berkeley take for granted the arts and the music and the ways that it's incorporated into your school day that is unlike any other place that I've ever been. And I've been in quite a few well-funded large districts where I would tell you that our babies do not consistently have access. You couldn't say that every student in 4th and 5th grade gets an instrument, or you couldn't say that everybody gets arts. I'm going to say that because my answer is kind of informed by my history in education, which is that extended learning is a way to give our babies access to arts and to the visual arts, performing arts, and just different types of learning that they don't typically get in the school day. Even though Berkeley does provide a lot of that, I still say that it's a place where they can do different types of dance, where they can engage in different types of STEM programs or more STEM in a new way than in the school day. So I think it's incredibly valuable. What I will also say to you is that extended learning, I mean, the school day can be too, we're working on that, but extended learning also is a place where it is easy for inequities to grow because oftentimes there's not like tons of funding. Just to be clear, like the funding that we have for extended learning oftentimes targets specific demographics of students, right? Which makes sense because, again, if it's about access and equity, like we're going to fund for these students to participate. But we know that a lot of folks like you, a lot of PTAs, right, enhance the extended learning or the after school programs. And you do so very well intended. And you do so at different capacities. And the difference in capacities, as well as the difference in willingness and a number of other things that create inequities for schools. So some schools raise 150, or some schools have access to program A, B, and C, and other schools don't. So my vision for extended learning in a district small and tight like Berkeley is that it doesn't have to be the exact same program, but our students should have similar access to different types of programs. So there should be a performing arts. But if you do, I should say, yeah, performing arts, was that dance, right? If you do tap and the other school does salsa and the other school does hip hop, like, I don't think we should be like, everybody has to have hip hop. But I do think that we should think about, as PTAs, or we think about extended learning, like, what is it that we want to kind of be our container? What do we want all of our students to have access to across the district? Conscious of the fact that different schools are different communities. Like, let's just be real, even though we're all Berkeley, every school has its own flavor. Every school has different interests. And so I wouldn't want to say that everybody gets the same thing in the same way, but I do think that all of our students should have access to similar things. So coherence is still possible and necessary to me in extended learning. But the equity piece gets hard if folks like you are not coming all together, having conversations. We don't dictate the PTA dollars, for example, right? But folks in this room, I saw faces when I said that. Maybe we do. But folks in this room are leaders on PTAs, right? I was at a school the other day and they're like, oh, we just talked to our PTA about our priorities this year. If PTAs all got together across Berkeley and said, well, here's our priorities for the year. Here's what we're gonna fund this year. That's one way to move us away from some of those inequities that inherently get created, right? Everybody's like, hey, we want to all send our kids on a trip, or we want to all fund an arts intervention, or we want to all do whatever. it doesn't eradicate the inequities that kind of can grow, but at least gets us tighter. So coherence is possible in this way. But I do think extended learning is really important. And it doesn't have to just be after the school day. It's the before school day and its activities and stuff on the weekends and in the summer, which we have many of those, but still small numbers because of funding. Jill, did you want to say something as the whole person over extended learning? I'm sorry.
I just, I also want to acknowledge that at least from, so Anikia referenced some of the state and federal dollars that we're receiving. Those grants have shifted over time, and they do come with rules and regulations about who we can serve. And I think that has been contributing to some of the situations where we have to prioritize our students who qualify for free and reduced price lunch, as an example. I will say that Christy Rosigno was hired, her first year was last year. And again, back to this infrastructure and understanding the existing system and trying to address some of the pain points is definitely work that she, alongside of Lisa Stupin, have been working on. Not the least of which has been the staffing challenge on top of some of these other complexities with regard to how we are able to enroll students and how we prioritize students based on the funding that we receive.
Yeah,
Great.
2 questions to Song.
Yeah, Rana, you want to go on the Rita?
Yeah.
Hi, Superintendent. I'm glad that we have this chance to talk about this. I actually put in the specific question about staffing, and I made it specific because I felt like it was a gate to talking about the fact that there isn't equal access for families right now, because there are even families with full-time needs who are on the waiting list, right? And we know anecdotally that there are people who have left the district because there isn't after school care possible at that site or location. So I guess to add on to Sung's comment about extended learning, not considering it as an extra or something, we're going to enrich, but even just fundamentally, we have no part-time options. So we have families, and part-time work is actually or caregiving, there are many ways that need would show up. And I feel that currently, coming out of the pandemic, we've seen that part-time is a huge need, and that whole population, and at our school, it's 1 out of 3 families, does not have access to after school at all, part-time or full-time. So I feel that, addressing the staffing would be one role, but currently our PTA is not providing classes, for as extracurricular supplementation. It's simply that parents need 1 extra hour on even a certain day, and that isn't being provided by the district. So my question is, how can we address, again, I'm part of the PTA collaborative, how can we address that part-time need? Because until even the full-time needs are met, we can't even talk about part-time needs, we don't have equal access to after-school care and options.
Mm-hmm. Nice to meet you, Rana. So I'm gonna let Jill respond to the staffing question, and I will say to you all, and it's good or bad, I'm not sure yet, but anytime we come together, I'm just gonna be really honest with y'all. I really am not gonna try to sell you a bill of goods. The reality is that it is not just Berkeley. Education organizations and many organizations are really struggling with hiring, right? I would argue that even pre-pandemic, I was in San Francisco at the time, finding folks to support and work in our after-school programs was a challenge. Oftentimes because of the percent, the FTE at that time was like, oh, this is a part-time job or just for 3 hours or whatever. I think the pandemic exacerbated all that, and it's fewer folks who are willing and able to do that kind of work. I will say to you that our staffing challenge, Rana, and that, again, I'm gonna let Jill speak to you about it more, is not because we disagree with you or not because we don't understand that I'm a whole mommy, right? I'm a mommy superintendent, so I didn't even get home tonight until 6. I who get my kid? I don't know. It's the whole call so-and-so, can I see so-and-so grab them, right? So I get it and it's real, but I'm being really honest with you all that it's not for lack of effort on our part, or it's not because we're not trying to hire. It really is it's a scarcity out there. And I talked to many folks in Oakland and San Francisco and traditional public schools and private schools and charter schools. Folks are not knocking down the doors to get these positions. So I'll let Jill talk about the 30 or so folks, but I just wanted to kind of echo with you and say, yep. And we keep trying, and it's a hard question to answer, because we do keep trying, and we want to make sure we have great folks and caring folks for our babies. We won't just grab anybody. And sometimes like, oh my God, can we just get somebody? It's been really, really challenging to get these positions filled. So, I would say, like, if you know folks who are interested, et cetera, but even that doesn't seem to work. I'll let Jill give you the more detailed answer to the 30, but I want to just honor your experience as a mother and the challenges that we're having with the staffing part.
Yeah, I do want to acknowledge that the staffing challenge has been very real, and it's probably the one top thing that keeps Lisa and Christy up at night, because we do know that folks are really anxious to get off of the waiting list. We learned a lot last year coming in. I started in August, so I came in sort of the middle of parents hadn't heard about whether or not they were going to have placements in the after school programs, and then started to dig, again, coming at this from a continuous improvement mindset, like what's the root cause around this, and part of the challenges that we have also been navigating was understanding the process for the personnel commission in particular. We have had on average somewhere between 25 to 30 vacancies at any given time, and what I learned was that has pretty much been true over the last couple of years. What we learned about part of that process was that the Personnel Commission was releasing 3 candidates at a time. And so we were able to connect with them and explain, if we had 30 candidates, but they've got more candidates in the queue, we could really interview multiple candidates at a time, which would lower the amount of organization that would take to organize an interview panel to conduct those interviews, just recognizing that the more people we could interview, the more of a chance that we would have to be able to place those positions. So I think we're now at a stage where we can get about 10 candidates at a given time for an interview, which is great. But there are still some parts to that process that take a long period of time. And candidates who might be interviewed and offered a position might also be applying for positions elsewhere. And it's been taking a minute to get our candidates all the way through that process. So again, this is an area that we've definitely been exploring with our partners at the Personnel Commission, just to better understand that process. And how we might be able to get candidates through that process in a faster manner. When we got this set of questions, there was a related component about Alivo and whether or not Alivo could add additional staffing. Alivo can help us expand the staffing ratio, but it doesn't resolve being able to add additional classrooms. We are still required to have a BUSD employee be the teacher or the leader of that particular class. We have some of our grade levels that have to maintain staffing ratios of 10 to 1. So we do use the Alivo staffing to expand that ratio by adding a second adult in the class, but we still need a BUSD employee to be the main point person for each of those after school classes. So this is, again, an ongoing effort. It's going to be a continued challenge until we can, get a large number of qualified applicants through that application process. I will add there's one other glitch that we are working to address that appears to happen seasonally, which is our before and after school programs staffing do not have anything in our current process that requires them to acknowledge whether or not they're going to be returning in the coming school year. And so we were expending a lot of effort trying to make individual contact with folks. And so that's definitely an area that we're looking at addressing, particularly as we come around to the spring, just so that we can also begin the hiring cycles for the coming year much earlier. But the hiring process has pretty much been ongoing since I got here.
Right. Rita, do you want to ask a question?
So my question is on a completely different area, but does have to do with funding, I guess. But it's about trying to access and support schools in utilizing the Prop 28 money. And I don't know about all the schools, but I know at mine we're trying to make some choices and decisions to be able to spend some of that money, and feeling like, you know, if it's not available for us to actually utilize, or when it will be. Anyway, if you have any more information on that, or if there could be more structure in place and guide for some extra guidance for being able to set that up, or if there's any way to, you know, work across schools so that every school isn't trying to do this independently.
Where'd you go, Jill? I was trying to find our. We had a little slide.
Yeah.
I was going to show you all a little slide.
You put it in your slide. I mean, so here's the short answer to that question, Rita, is that we are in a holding pattern with the state. We provided school sites, so you may have seen a couple of the slides that the superintendent has and can put up, which, you know, we were actually updating today. So we knew that Prop 28 was going to be a big topic for our PTAs and school site councils in particular. Pete Gidlin, who is the head of our VAPA department, alongside of Lisa Stupin, myself, and a few others, developed some guidance and a couple of slides for principals to be able to share information with their school communities last spring. What we had communicated at that time was that we did not know when the funds were going to become available. Oftentimes when the state indicates that there will be grants, those grants come down the pike at some point during the summer. That has not been the case with the Prop 28 funds. There was I was looking at one of the websites a couple of weeks ago, and I think the wording was, information will be available no sooner than fall of 2023. And so what we're hearing now from the state is that they're going to provide the allocations, information about the allocations to local school districts, LEAs, at some point in October or November, but the funding is not going to be available to school districts until February of 2024. When we left off in the spring, they thought these allocations were going to come in the summer. So I just want to be clear that, you know, you're not getting information because we don't yet have information from the state. Pete did go to a meeting that the Alameda County Office of Education had just last week. And this is still basically the message. We don't have that yet. And so what we had been encouraging principals to communicate to their PTAs is that what we were noticing is that there is a significant amount of PTA money that is currently allocated to things that would be considered allowable under this grant, particularly for the staffing. So there's some rules around the Prop 28 money and having to use, I think it was 80% of it specifically on staffing. And so we noticed that a lot of the PTA allocations would, you know, the Prop 28 money in some cases would like cover the whole of what the PTA was currently spending on staffing. And in some cases it wouldn't, but it would contribute to that. And so what we were asking sites to do was to consider a rough draft plan, or a plan B, if you will. Like we need to move forward with the current funding model. So if a PTA is prioritizing an arts class, for example, they would need to cover that arts class with their PTA funding until the Prop 28 why funding came in, and then we would be able to make a funding change. While we recognize that there might be some efficiencies with centralizing the funds, the state has made it very clear that these are going to be allocations out to the school sites, and each school site is going to have to develop and post on our district website their individual spending plans. So that's definitely some things that we will help and support school sites to be able to do that. And we know that this is a hot topic, and we'll be getting information out as soon as we get it, but we don't actually have those guidelines from the state yet.
Can I just ask, I'm at one of those schools where we're actually looking to hire somebody, and I think we're not the only one. And so it's looking at, and from what you're saying, we can't even really plan to hire somebody until February.
Nope. We can't, not on the funding that we don't have. I mean, and I just, my cautionary tale, only because I was a teacher and I was a principal, but my first job in the central office was in state and federal programs. So I have this background sort of drilled into me about how state and federal programs and funding specifically works. And I had not yet seen a situation where the state had been in a position to pull back funding, which is what they did with the arts, music, and instructional materials block grant, which is different from the Prop A money, and one of the learning recovery funds. Normally, the state would distribute funding results, and you would get pretty close to the allocation. Sometimes those are impacted by your student enrollment. But in the case of the AMIM grant in particular, the state pulled back a whole bunch of money. So, while they're gonna, so my hunch is that they're trying to get to a place where they can give districts a more accurate accounting of what to expect, because they got a lot of feedback from school districts, superintendents, school board members, that pullback on the AMIM grant, the lottery, the one-time block grant fund caused a lot of problems. So we cannot spend money that we don't have. That's the short of it.
Thank you.
We do have a question about these outdoor education programs. I think we were sharing with you. We just quickly grabbed a lot of data from all the different sites and found that it seems like every site except for this is at elementary school, every elementary school except for Mendez has an outdoor education program at the 5th grade. And then there are some sites that have also a program at the couple that have also 4th grade and 5th grade. And so I thought, I think the question we had was, something about, what do you think are the steps that we could take to make sure that everyone, at least at 5th grade, has something for this sort of, multi-night outdoor education program? If you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I was curious about, so just in terms of steps, for me, what I would recommend as a first step is to talk to the leadership for PTA at Sylvia Mendez, particularly if this is a question that's brewing, to talk to the leadership there to understand why. And the reason why I say that is because if what you shared to me, which is what I saw in your data, is that every school has it, but this one, I would first want to understand why doesn't this one have it, right? Before I'm even able to propose or give ideas around how can everybody have it, I want to be respectful of that community, that leadership in that school, to say what's going on here? Was that a conscious choice? Why was it made, et cetera? So I don't know if that's happened. I was looking for, I think Kelly, Sylvia Mendez, would love to support you in engaging in that conversation, but really, honestly, you all, absent of that information, I'm hard pressed to be and this is what you should do to get everybody to have it. I have been in communities where there have been schools that everybody goes on the 5th grade mosaic trip, and particular schools, because of the community in those schools, I'm not making this assumption about Sylvia Mendez, choose not to send their kids to that particular trip. They actually, I've had families say, we don't want our kids to go to mosaic for X, Y, and Z reason. And so the school opted out of going to mosaic. That's just an example. And I say that to say, I would like to engage in a conversation about what's happening at Sylvia Mendez. Why? One of the things that I think I saw in that line for Sylvia Mendez, that the PTA quote just doesn't have the budget. And so I know that all the PTAs prioritize and make decisions about what they're going to fundraise for, how they're going to use those funds. So in addition to like what's going on at Mendez, why they're not having these outdoor experiences, I would want to understand, how is the PTA budgeting their monies and prioritizing how they spend their dollars, et cetera? And why, if this is an option, is this not an option that's being supported in the ways that it's being supported at some of the other schools? Not at all trying to imply that kids should only be able to go places if the PTA supports it, but just looking at that pattern of the list that you showed me. So for me, those were all the questions that came up for me when I saw this on the sheet. And I think those same questions came up from Jill. What I can tell you is that we're not denying any one school, right? So it's really understanding that context. There are things that schools have to have in order to be approved for a field trip. So I do want to make sure y'all know that there definitely has to be a clear academic rationale. We do ask our schools to provide that. The funding needs to be in place, be it site funding, additional outside funding, et cetera. There needs to be a staff member. Ideally, if it's a classroom trip, it needs to be a classroom teacher who is the point and the main chaperone. We need to make sure that the ratios are appropriate for supervision. And we also need to make sure that if it's an overnight or out of state, that our board approves it, and that, of course, the guardians give permission. So any one of those things could be a reason why Sylvia Mendez isn't participating, aside from just understanding the context. So our ask was that we could table this one and come back if Kelly doesn't have all the answers, which I'm not putting you on the spot, Kelly, but we can come back to really understand and give some more informed next steps. And I would definitely have the Sylvia Mendez PTA, or very least the principal at Sylvia Mendez, a part of that conversation before I make any recommendations. Kelly, sorry.
No, thank you so much for your time tonight, Superintendent. I deeply appreciate it. Some of the information I do have, so the nutshell version is that a couple of principals ago, as you may know, Sylvia Mendez has had high turnover rate on their principals and leadership at the school recently. A few principals ago, a service was engaged. That service was switched by the principal, but the staff was not informed, and therefore the staff did not sign on to that new service and that new plan. And as a result, basically the program fell apart. I think, given that was right before COVID, given that then COVID happened, it just slipped off the radar of the PTA in general, and or was moot at that time. So it didn't rise back to the top of any list of priorities, because the Sylvia Mendez PTA budget became deeply underfunded this year, and we are already scrambling to make ends meet on other levels. And so, of course, that wasn't slotted back in any way. There is a drive from the parent community there to reinstate it, especially given the climate change policy that's been instated in fostering education around climate for all students in the district. And I think the larger question is, now that BPTA has a series of, we hope to start instilling sort of extended task forces that, writ large, over the course of many years, how do we start to think about re-engaging the district on this to make it available for all students? And that would include students who may be unhoused or maybe under disability programs where some adaptive outdoor ed would need to be included as well.
Got it. I think
thank you for your time.
No, I appreciate that. I didn't even, Jill, that's new information for me. And again, this is why I think it's helpful just to kind of really take some time to understand the context. And that's just based on your recollection, Kelly, right? Of like what might have happened. There might be some other things that happened too. So I would love to support you and the PTA leadership at Mendez. It's at the very least engage Ms. Maria in the conversation. And you might have, I won't take that this whole meeting to talk about that specific thing, but to engage you all. And you shook your head no? Oh, Miss Kelly.
No, I meant we don't need to harp on my specific situation.
I was agreeing with you. But yeah, would love to better understand what's going on? Because like you said, that was a couple principles ago, that was a different time. It didn't resurface. Because my next question is like, well, did we try to, can we try to resurface it and re-engage folks? Both the PTA, I know you said some parents are excited about it, but also even the educators who might not have signed off if they're still the same. So I feel like there's some ways that we could try to approach and address this to see if we can get them in as a part of this program, or just having a trip for fifth graders. And then I think, to some, there's a comeback conversation around, how the possibility of expanding. But again, it's gonna start with us having conversations around PTA leadership, around like, how do we prioritize things and guide the things that our PTAs, our respective PTAs are raising money for and allocating money for, et cetera. And then what is our will to kind of push on folks to say, we actually really believe as the PTA leadership across these sites that every fourth and fifth grader should be able to go and have this experience. And so we want to have all PTAs commit to doing X percent, the district's going to do this percent. So I think I don't want to like act like we just come here and we say whatever and then all PTAs like, yeah, we'll do that. Like, the reality of it is that there are some differences. Am I saying too much? There's some differences in how folks do the business at the various PTAs. There's some differences in terms of what PTAs want to prioritize with their fundraising and how they spend the money. And so we can't ignore that. If we really are trying to make a push and say we want every fourth and fifth grader to have an experience, of course, the district can try to fund those things, but that's unlikely because our budget is tight and fixed as well. And we fund what we can fund. So we definitely will need some partnership from y'all to be willing to say like, yeah, we all want to do it this way, and folks agree. And that conversation needs to be had. To Sung, I think I'm not talking to you, to Sung, to everybody. And this conversation that you all are starting, because I heard you even last year talk about wanting more coherence and alignment and opportunities for, equitable access and equitable programming across PTAs. But there are, 14 of y'all on this call, and you represent a small subset of all the folks who make up the PTA. So it's going to be, how do we get that message out to everybody and really get folks to rally behind it? Is probably a larger conversation that I think would respond to this fourth grade access to trips, as well as just in general, like, how do we prioritize how PTAs spend their money in general?
Yeah, and the other one, just a quick follow-up on one of the other thoughts was also if there would be value in having educators who are involved in this to sort of share their experience across schools. For instance, the reason that it's so, I think one of the reasons that it's so successful at Washington, where my kids are, is because we have two educators who are really, really committed to it, and they pour a lot of energy into it, and that sort of thing. It really makes it a wonderful program. So I think sharing that across the district is also can be helpful. Vicky, real fast.
Yeah, I was just going to say another, I think, step is really for the district to help us find ways to incentivize faculty to participate. If the district and the curriculum thinks that this is an important experience for students, I think in our situation, it's not necessarily a fundraising. It's that the faculty aren't getting paid to work 24 hours a day for 4 days. There's no sort of stipend for them or any incentive for them other than because they love teaching. And over the years, our various faculty have gotten burnt out. So the ways that we can partner with faculty in the district to make it an incentive for them to actually do it, I think is something that not necessarily the PTA can help with.
I appreciate that, Vicky. Hi, Vicky. Happy New Year. Haven't seen you in a while. We're gonna put a pin in this one. I appreciate that one, and a part of the teacher in me struggles with that one, only because I was a teacher for a while. Yeah, I'm gonna hold that one, Vicky. But yes, because you did specifically say incentivize. You didn't necessarily say money. You necessarily say, and so there are ways that we could get folks excited to do it. I hear you. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna pull back. But yeah, I agree with you. There's some ways that we could work together to do that, and so I appreciate you making that offering.
And I think we have one last question about a calendar date. I'm not too sure exactly what that refers to personally. It has to do with a date that floats around November 1st as a staff development day, perhaps, or some kind of holiday.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone remember that?
You guys asked the question. There are other school districts that fixed their secondary break.
Yeah.
Conference day on November 1st. Welcome reprieve from most post-Halloween. and it says, could BUSD do this as well? So this calendar, and specifically that date on the calendar, is something that is negotiated at the table, is what we say, with our labor partners. Because it relates to the end of the first trimester and our parent-teacher conferences. Typically, that's always been on a Friday. But what I can say to you is that when it is time for us to go back to the table, which is yearly to negotiate our calendar, that this is going to be something that is proposed and offered, and that Sam Tobias Espinosa, who's our Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, does a really good job of researching other districts and evaluating their calendar. So when she is at the table with our partners, kind of saying, here's how other districts do it. I've been in a couple other districts. Everyone doesn't do it, but you are right. There are some examples of districts or schools that do it, because sometimes there's a little opportunity in the larger district for schools to make their calendar. Long story. Anyway, it is something that can definitely be broached at the negotiations table when that time comes. But it cannot be like a mid-year thing. The calendars are made in advance.
Right.
Okay, friends. I do
Yeah.
the next thing now.
I think we're all good, right? Thank you so much.
Yep. And then I know Jessica has set it up for us to kind of have a regular cadence. Okay, so I will see you all soon. I will also say that even outside of that cadence, if you have questions, or if you're like, oh, the next meeting, Inikia and Jill aren't going to be here, but we had a couple of questions, whenever possible, we are willing to kind of put it in a Google Doc and to give you some responses. So you don't have to wait for us to physically be here every time to get your questions answered.
Great.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
We had the shade question, and the reason I left it off is because I was sort of in the middle of a conversation with John about it, John Calise. So I hope you don't mind. So I'm hoping Patricia, that we'll be able to get to some resolution just with him. I know that might be hard, but let's just try that. And if it doesn't, we'll definitely bring it up again next time around. So I hope that's okay.
That's fine. It's
Okay.
going to be an interesting journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So that was really great. I really appreciate everyone's questions, and I thought we only had it for half an hour, so I was appreciative of the extra time. I had actually only budgeted until 8:30 today. So if people wanted to, it's 8:42. Do people want to still stay on and talk about a couple other things? What's everyone's feeling about this?
What are the other things that you had planned?
I wanted just to make sure that if everyone had a rep to come here, that's one thing. The other thing is that we wanted to still do a drive to get more people into different sort of working groups if there's still interest in it. So we have a handful of responses right now. We probably could use some more. The idea of the working groups is that each one should have like 2 co-leads and a SMART goal, and then just run with it. That's it. So that's that. And then I think there are a couple open items that people wanted to talk about, just sort of in our sort of ad hoc period.
I'm fine to stay till 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
15 more minutes.
Yeah, it's fine. There was some interest in talking about OFI funding. Do we need to talk about that some more? Or OFI family emergency funds? Anything about that?
It just seemed to Sung that there wasn't consensus, and I was wondering if we could just revisit it a little, like level set again. That's all.
Yeah, sure. So there was some interest in seeing if we could pool a portion of our funds into something like a universally accessible or unlimited fund. Right now, the way it works is that everyone funds themselves. So if Willard has $10,000, then any Willard family can access that $10,000. And I believe my understanding is that that's done through the OFI specialist at the site. So everything's all kind of handled there. So we just write the check, and someone else takes care of it, and it's OFI who handles that. And that seems like the appropriate way of doing it. I think what was happening is that when we started thinking about pooling our resources together and making it so that was open to anyone, it kind of rubbed some people at OFI the wrong way because there was a whole process that needed to be built, and that process wasn't built yet. Because how would that work in that case? Who would make the final decision as to what families would be able to access those funds? And so I've been hearing a lot from Carol saying, look, if you guys want to do this, can you please talk to us about this so that we can be on the same page for this, not just, unilaterally go at this. Because it's not going to help them if we just suddenly give them all this money and they said, well, we don't have a process for figuring out who to donate it to. Yes, Vicky.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the original reason we thought we should pool the money together is because OFI wanted us to do it, so they had more access to funds. If it's we want to do it and they don't particularly want to do it, I don't know why we should push that.
My understanding was Hollis's idea, quite frankly. So it was coming from us.
Okay.
We should have this because and we did think of one case example. It was actually Willard, because they don't have a fund and they had a family that was in desperate need of something.
Well, and then my next question was, and I'm not sure if this is clear from the emails, but the school that no longer is contributing to the fund is not because they spent too much money. That was what the gist of it was, is that they went through the money too quickly, so they're not going to contribute to it anymore, which means that there's like a higher need there. So I don't know if I just read that wrong. I've been kind of overwhelmed the last couple of weeks, but if that person's here and wants to explain.
I'd be very curious about that too. I was wondering.
Yeah. Yeah. So our OFI person just sort of was able to justify that a need was there, and people kept coming back for more funds, so she just kept giving more money, and it was over like, I don't know, 5 months, and the 3,500 that we donated was gone. And so then like that was the first donation we made since like the pandemic. And so the OFI person was like, I would actually just rather give people gift cards at the holidays than have that fund of money available to me. So it was sort of, she came to that decision. So it does sound like it would need to be centralized through OFI if something. I think it was her together with the principal came to that decision.
Yeah, that's sort of interesting because I feel like maybe she just needs to talk to her colleagues about better guidelines of when or when not to give people money. I mean, because yes, gift cards are great and we do the gift card fundraising and in addition to this, but a gift card doesn't pay your electric bill, or if your water is gonna get turned off, kind of thing, right? But that would also again concern me if there's one person going through the funds so quick versus another school they're not, that then that's one school's going to eat up the funds from other schools. So I do think this whole discussion is very tricky on coming to a consensus.
I'd like to chime in because I originally spoke with our OFI representative at Emerson, and the money was run through because there was something catastrophic, of a house burned down or something that was super catastrophic, and that was their lifeline. So post that 2 years later, trying to put that much money back into the bank just didn't seem to make much sense.
Okay, well, I'll follow up on the, sorry. Yeah, so we just have a budget line item that we put 5,000 in every year. So the 3,500, and maybe we just raise more money or have more flexibility in our budget. But I feel like something like that, a better way would have been to help OFI drive a GoFundMe and go out to the community and fund specifically for that catastrophic thing. Obviously that's in the past, so we can't fix that now, but I would encourage you guys to maybe revisit that just so that there is some emergency funding in there for your location. And then whoever was talking, sorry about interrupting.
It's okay, Vicki, thanks. I was just going to ask or comment that was the example that I had in my mind when I was going through these emails around some catastrophic event happening to a family, right, where you need a large amount of money kind of right up front, and donations to our PTAs are tax deductible for families or people making those donations, whereas gift cards and GoFundMe's are not. And it feels a bit like there's the donation that's already been made plus the additional ask of like, can we please do more, when there is this pool of money that could be distributed if there was a process in place. Somebody mentioned on the thread that it seems like a no-brainer to catch everyone, but I see the hesitancy around like having to develop a new process for it, and I may be missing something entirely here. And also, it just so happens that Sylvia Mendez, for some reason, my school has like the largest amount in that pool. So I would have to go back to our PTA and find out like historically what's going on there, and also are we a yes for like pooling it collectively.
I also think that
Thanks.
it would have to be on like a per capita or something like that. There's no way that a small school is going to raise as much or fund as much as some of the larger schools in the district.
Yeah. So if we do the pooling thing, if it's something that we would want to do, we need to do it. We need to be lockstep with OFI on this. I think, just completely off the record, I know this is recording, but I get the sense that what it did, this discussion caused sudden what's the term, scrutiny into how this was happening at the school sites, when there perhaps in the past may not have been a great deal of oversight, because for the longest time OFI did not have a supervisor, to my understanding, or wasn't part of, she talks about organizational clarity, that was an example of that. So I think that also may have played into some of this as well. I don't really know, I'm just sort of speculating, but I think if we decide to do this, we need to be like hand in glove with OFI to figure this out.
Also, like, I just deducted my GoFundMe donations. Am I not allowed to do that? I thought that's a tax deductible donation.
GoFundMe is not 501c3?
Oh, okay.
Crap. I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you make, Kelly.
Yeah, good to know.
Great. Anything else that people wanted to bring up in the last 8 minutes here?
Can we just solidify on working groups really quick, if there's anything more to be said there?
Yeah, so let me just pull it up. I think I put it in the minutes like that. Hang on a second here. So I think we have the following. So in terms of what our interests that people have registered through the Google form, again, we only had just a very small handful of people reply. Academics, after school, facilities improvement, and school safety. Those are some issues that people are interested in. So when it comes to academics, we already have something I think that we can take, for literacy, we have something that's really well established, as you all well know. If there are other subjects that people want to work on, I know my understanding is that they are piloting some science and maybe some social studies as well. And math, I haven't heard about that yet, but math definitely is going to be something that's big and important. There's an after-school program that's the after-school collaborative, and that's Christy, so I can definitely get people in touch with that. Facilities improvement, that's something that's definitely would be probably worth doing. I don't think we have any infrastructure for that. There's an existing committee for that, but I don't know how responsive that is. And I think I don't think people have been feeling very satisfied with how that works. And then finally, there's school safety. There's a security group that's already been formed, and I think they already have a lot of sort of high level, board level communications around active shooter. But then for other types of things like pedestrian safety and so on, I think that's been sort of sporadic. So I think those are the 4 things that so far have come up that people are interested in doing. Just as an informer. Yes, Rita.
I know at BAM, there'd be some, maybe we are in a different place with the Prop 28 money than others because we have been contracting all this time. And so we don't have staff that we're paying. So unless we only want to spend 20% of the Prop 28 money, we need to hire. But I know that we feel like we're doing this pretty blind and would love to collaborate with other schools. And so if there were a working group on that. The other thought I had was, isn't there already an arts group?
Yeah, not that I know of. I was going to suggest that maybe you could have that as a standing line item in the treasurer's group. Would that be possible?
I can bring it there too.
Yeah, that might be a way. And then basically let the treasurers to kind of go out and sort of whatever you do, beat the bush to try to find people who are interested in arts. And
yeah, at the same time, it's sort of a separate issue of like being tasked with supporting hiring rather than, I mean, budget and whatnot feels, I mean, I guess it's related, but yeah.
So Rita, do you guys still make a big check to the SSC, but it just pays for contractors instead of staff? Is that, or you guys pay directly and not through the SSC?
So I'm not our treasurer.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure how that'll actually plays out. I just know that we're in a situation of like, we went ahead and contracted with the same, not even the same, we added contracts thinking we'd get at least the 20% of that money back for our school. We added several contracts, and then we're hoping to switch and hire somebody for spring. But, you know, if money is not really going to be available until February, I mean, our school has something of a history of like struggling with hiring in different positions that are like either PE or art. And then maybe the person didn't show up for most of this time and got paid anyway, and we couldn't get rid of them. So like that was the rationale for why our principal likes using contracts rather than staff positions. But now we're stuck kind of.
Are we 100% sure that the money can't be used for contracts? Because my concern is that if we can't fill the positions, we're using contract positions for positions we can't fill. But I know, for example, our dance instructor lost out to another dance instructor for part of her contract because of seniority, and someone else in the district wanted the position. And she's like the person who's already there. She teaches the lower grades and everything, and they had to give it to somebody else. So that's like exactly what you're talking about.
Oh my gosh, send me your name, we'll hire it, BAM.
Well, she's still there for half the day. She's just not full time.
We could pick up the 2 classes. I mean, it's,
yeah.
I mean, I'm joking a little, but like at the same time, it's the idea of hiring from scratch is very overwhelming to our system.
Right. Well, and you guys shouldn't have to do that. I mean, your principal should be doing that, but yeah. Well, your principal has to do that because you know, it has to go through HR. And that's the thing where maybe that we can figure out if there's some sort of loophole, because again, what good is the money if we can't hire people and we can't use contractors? Like, for example, the YMCA is one that we often will contract with for like PE or outdoor stuff. And, you know, those people are part-time at our schools and part-time at the Y. They're not going to quit their full-time Y job to work part-time hours at a school, right? But by contracting with us, we get that benefit. So I don't know if there's a way to figure out through the arts money how to be a little bit more flexible, or like Cala Arts is another place, right?
That's one of our contracts for that we've got for the fall. But again, we were holding off on what we were going to do for spring if we hired.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, but again, if it doesn't sound like anyone else is in quite this position, or if, you know, again, if there are, send people my way and I'll nudge them towards the people who are of interest at BAM. Because
could we just start out just you know how I was so impressed with how quickly everyone was able to pull data together on the outdoor ed thing. Could we do something like that where people just say, here are the contractors we use? So I'm not exactly sure how to frame the question. Maybe you do, Rita, but here's the list of people and how many hours they spend doing this type of art, whether it's dance or visual arts or whatever. And maybe think of them as a pool of resources that we can maybe tap into, or maybe we could say, hey, we can sweeten the deal for you and give you more hours. Would you like that? we'll go to this other school, somehow act as a clearinghouse for that sort of information for all of us so that we can get to the same level. I think what was kind of interesting hearing from Inikia today, and for me, I noticed that this year has really kind of changed her stance, that she's more willing to, you know, exert a little bit of leadership, saying, look, I really would like you to become more equitable somehow, to kind of raise the level for everyone. So I think in keeping with that, to a certain extent, you know, maybe doing something with arts and trying to coordinate and harmonize in some way would be really helpful.
Yeah, I can try and put together at least some structure around a sheet that I send out and everybody can.
Yeah, if ever, yeah, I think people would be willing to do that. I think that would probably take pretty fast. If we could do it quickly. Yeah, Patricia.
I mean, I mean, I don't mean this in a, like, I don't trust you guys, but there is a weird, we're all kind of vying for, you know, like the same people, like they're, you know, my old
Yeah.
principal was like, make sure we don't lose our dance person because this other principal is trying to grab them. And I'm like,
Right.
what? Like, there's like that weird drama. So like, and I, you know, that's why we have these meetings and we're trying not to have that. But it is kind of weird that we all kind of are fighting. I mean, it's same when we all do raffles, right? We're all asking the same local businesses and hoping to get there first. And it's like, it's kind of a weird world.
This was why I was hoping for more structure from at the higher levels so that we could, you know, not
Yeah.
have to feel like we're fighting over.
Yeah, race to the bottom. Yeah, that's a really good
Totally,
point.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally hear you, Patricia.
Yeah. Sorry. That's just me. Oh, those public schools.
Yeah. No, I do that with, like, you know, like new like campsites or something like that, or, you know, don't tell anybody about this, you know, that's what. Yeah. But hopefully we don't have that problem with arts.
Yeah,
arts
so, you know,
teachers.
there's honor in our making in our
Honor
sharing.
among thieves.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else burning? Or at 9:01? That's all. I just want to.
Our treasurer we kind of inherited a kind of a messy, some messy books. So when's the next treasurer meeting, subgroup meeting? Is it?
It's the third Thursday of the month.
Okay. And I think
But I'm actually supposed to send a message around because so previously it was alternating noon and I think at 8 o'clock, and I can only do I can't log in the middle of the day, and so I might be my plan is to send around an email, hopefully tomorrow, asking if to get a consensus about whether it would work to do, we could do alternating third Mondays and third Thursdays, if that would help people.
Hopefully, I think you added her, so I think she's on the chain, but yeah, we just need a little help. We're good in terms of like money, we're in a good spot that way, but our books are need some TLC. Anyway, so
Okay.
that would be helpful.
Thank you, Merlin. Thanks for logging in. Great. Well, thank you all, everyone. We can wrap up and we'll see you again in a month. Okay,
Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye.